All right, Al Alcoholic. Sobriety date May 5th, 1987. That's because Alcoholics Anonymous works under any and all conditions. I've gotten a perfect release from the obsession to drink alcohol through the 12 steps. And the consistency that I have in the fellowship with attendance in meetings as well as sponsorship. That doesn't mean I haven't thought about a drink. Doesn't mean I haven't dreamed about a drink. But the obsession has been released and it has not come back from me. I'm one that believes that in Alcoholics Anonymous, and when I say in, that it's a drunk-proof program. Around Alcoholics Anonymous, anything can happen. Relapse is part of the illness. It's not part of the recovery of alcoholism. 12 steps are a recovery method here. And if an alcoholic of my type will embrace that process willingly and to the best of my ability, then I can have the same thing happen. And with that release from the obsession to drink alcohol, also we're given a quality of life without drinking. That can happen to any alcoholic that comes here and embraces the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. 100%, but not perfectly, because I've never done AA perfectly. And I'm glad on some days there was no grades. In fact, as I get into my story, I like to share that there's been some days that I've been sober that the very best that I could do was get to the meeting with my shoes tied. And I've been very happy that the meeting has been there. And I've always been a big fan of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. They've never been a chore for me. They've never been a hardship. They've never rarely ever been anything that I had to talk myself out of or talk myself into. I've just gone. And I've always benefited. I've been thinking about my grand sponsor, Clancy, lately. I really miss him. Not everybody had the same experience with Clancy as I did, and I've heard it. And if you ever hung around with Clancy, you heard a lot of yays and nays about him as well. But he was somebody that really changed my life, and he really got to me. And a couple things that he said that's been on my mind is that the only problem with Alcoholics Anonymous is full of alcoholics. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And the other thing that he would say, and there's many things that Clancy said that people share, but the other thing that I always remember him sharing is what I'm thinking about that sick puke, I'm not thinking about this sick puke. And I think that's really important, that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a way to come outside of myself, where for a long time I was stuck in myself. I was obsessed with me. And I found a way through the 12 steps, consistency in meetings and sponsorship, a way to come outside of myself. And it's a big change. It's really nice today to see a lot of friends I met online here. Carol, I'm kind of her substitute speaker a lot, or she thinks of me and shares it with someone. I end up someplace far away sometimes, and and I got to meet Carol. And then there's Deb, and she helps our group out with our flyers, and she's starting to get me to speak in other places. I'd probably be on my bicycle right now if it wasn't for them. So very thankful they're in my life. And then there's Sherry, who I call the blue ribbon baby that everybody would want, somebody like Sherry, because she just grabs Alcoholics Anonymous 100% and takes off. And well, if we sponsored more people like that, it'd be great, wouldn't it? But when we sponsor people, we sponsor them on a lot of different levels. There's no cookie cutter method here. We have to reach people where they're at, and hopefully we can bring them along. I learned that the hard way. I thought one size fits all, and that's not true in sponsorship. You got some folks that just have a lot of trouble, and you got to meet them where they're at. And I like what our literature talks about in the big book on page 18 and 19. The way of being successful is that we don't come from a holier than thou position, that we have no axes to grind. There's no lectures to endure here. That we have our only desire is to be helpful. And I think that's really important. That I don't have to be somebody that I'm not when I'm trying to help somebody. Is that I can help somebody where I can help them. And that's really opened up a lot of doors for me. I've been a lot more helpful to my fellow alcoholic than I was maybe 15 years ago. And one thing that happens over a period of time in AA is that you drop a lot of your rigidities, a lot of the black and white, a lot of everything that this is the way or the highway. And you find out there's gray areas here. And at first you don't really like them. You don't agree with them. It can't be gray. This is the way it is. And you find out there's gray areas. And I'm not talking about the 12 traditions, because the 12 traditions are not the 12 opinions here. They're the 12 traditions, and they're written in our literature, and they're in Pass It On. They're in Language of the Heart. They're in the 12 and 12. They're in AA Comes of Age. They're in our history. And I am an advocate that we are a 3 legacy program, that we're not a 1 legacy program, though our talks are usually 1 legacy. And they're meant to be 1 legacy for identification and for recovery, but we are 3 legacies. And it's easy to get waterlogged in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous because it's a precious, inspired book. And it updates itself, and most of us feel it's very amazing. And what comes out of the book and the instructions to recovery have brought recovery to millions and millions of people. And not just in AA, but there's a lot of other fellowships out there that took everything because Bill Wilson gave it to them. The only thing Bill Wilson said is that what you can't have, there's only one thing you can't have. You can have our traditions, you can have our steps, you can have our concepts, you can have everything we have to offer. The only thing that you can't have is you can't have our name, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's ours. So we have brought recovery to the world, is what we've done. And I'm a fan of the online participation. It's opened up what Bill Wilson called the world arteries. I've got friends in Australia now. I've got friends in Poland. I've got friends in England. I've got friends in Scotland. I've got friends in Minnesota. I've got friends in Winnipeg, Canada. I got friends in Texas. I got friends in California that I would have never met. And you would have never met me. I think this is one of the greatest things that have happened in Alcoholics Anonymous in many, many years. Because it's opened up a lot of doors that I think were closed for a lot of people. And it's brought recovery to a lot of places that may not have been exposed to the recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous as we know it. And I always like to say that sometimes the best kept secret in Alcoholics Anonymous is Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's quite a discovery when you discover that, when you've already been going to meetings, that there's more to this than meets the eye sometimes. But thank God it's simple. Thank God it calls for an open mind. Thank God it calls for willingness. And thank God it calls for honesty. Wilson said those are the essentials to recovery, and that anybody that's willing to embrace recovery with those essentials can recover from alcoholism and have a spiritual experience, what they originally called it, and later on they translated it into a spiritual awakening. Because not everybody's going to have a sudden and profound effect. Some is going to be a lot slower. So I like to start in 1982. I flunked out of college for the second time. I'm living in an abandoned house across the street from the college I'm going to. An ex-biker named Pirate owns it. There's no plumbing in it. There's a couple rooms and a roof. There's a front door that hardly works. And I'm sitting in there and wondering what I'm going to do with my life. And so I'm going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd already been there because I'd had 5 drunk driving charges before you got in trouble in the United States. Now you get in a lot of trouble for it, and certainly you should be in a lot of trouble for it. But back then they didn't make it a lot of trouble. So I went to AA, and I went to AA for 10 months, and I did what you said to do. And what you said back then was I needed to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I'm here to tell you that didn't get me drunk. You said after that I need to go to a meeting every day, and I'm here to share that didn't get me drunk. You gave me a book called The 12 Steps to Happiness. It was published by Hazelton. Didn't know any better. I read it. Seemed like a good book. It didn't get me drunk. I read some of the big book. I fell asleep because I didn't know how to read it. I don't believe that got me drunk. I went to step 5 and I stopped. And I don't believe that got me drunk. I got a sponsor. I talked to him on a daily basis, and I didn't talk to him much, and I don't believe that got me drunk. What got me drunk is I had a reservation, and the reservation was that I was not 100% powerless over alcohol. And I couldn't get myself to get 100%, even though I remember sometimes I was trying to. Okay, you know you are, but it just didn't stick. I just was not convinced I was 100% powerless over alcohol. I saw that my life was unmanageable due to my drinking, but I just couldn't get that first part. So at 10 months, I was in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown. There was a bar that's closed now. It's called the Bayou. I went in the bar and I ordered a Heineken. And I drank it. And everybody knows what happened after that. You know what happened because you're alcoholic like me. If you are alcoholic, you had another one. And everybody knows what happened after that. I had another one. And by the 3rd, 4th, or 5th Heineken that night, when the alcohol rose to my head, I remember saying, just like yesterday, I'm not going to give this up anymore. I absolutely are in love with this sensation. And I forgot about the 10 months of Alcoholics Anonymous I'd been in. And I fell back in love with King Alcohol. And I had no intention of going back to a meeting at all. I was done. Now, I liked Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't mistrust the people. I liked the people. I didn't have a problem with the higher power. I didn't have a problem with anything that I could remember. I had no prejudice. I was just finished. I was back to drinking. And I didn't know that I suffered from a progressive illness. It always got worse. It didn't get better. I didn't know I had an obsession of the mind that I could stop drinking anytime, any place, anywhere, but I couldn't stay stopped. I didn't know I had an abnormal reaction to alcohol, that once I started drinking, I ended up drunk. I thought I was trying to have fun. I didn't know that it was a hopeless progression. And I didn't know that it was fatal. I was going to go back to the bar the next night, and I did. Within a couple of months, I lost the job I had. I was in trouble. I got another job. I was in trouble. I stayed with that job right up to the time I came in. My car was hardly running. My bank account was broke. My parents weren't talking to me. My brother wasn't talking to me. And the not yets that I told myself happened. I said, I'm never going to be a morning drinker. I became a morning drinker. Now, if you become a morning drinker, you're not very earthly good anymore. It's going to be hard to hold a job. It's going to be hard to sustain a relationship. It's going to be hard really to do life. I'm a morning drinker now. I'm a daily drinker. And I know now that I'm an oblivion drinker, even though I was an oblivion drinker for a long time. I was in a different type of oblivion. And 2 men sat down with me and put me on probation at my job and sent me home that night and said, if you want to keep your job, you're going to have to stop drinking. I went home that night and I wrestled with that. And like Bill Wilson talked about, fear sobered me up that night because I wanted to drink. And I thought at any moment I was going to cave on that drink. But I didn't, because fear kept me sober. And what I was really afraid of that I didn't have anywhere to turn, that I was going to end up on the park benches in Washington, D.C. of the homeless folks that I saw growing up with the brown paper bags, bumming the change on the corners to get more alcohol. That's what was in my mind, and I was scared of that because I knew that was where I was heading. I was going to be a homeless person. So I came here, and I came here the next day. I went to a meeting, and I didn't think I was going to stay here. I don't even think I was looking for a sobriety date. I was in a lot of trouble, and I was getting sick from the drinking, and I knew that. But something happened that was miraculous this time. Somewhere in May or June of 1987, I admitted to myself that I was 100% powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. It was now 100%. There wasn't a reservation anymore or a lurking notion. That was a game changer. Because with that came automatically step 2, and I didn't even know it came, is all of a sudden I had hope that I could live a different life. And the hope came from the fellowship of AA. And I became willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Now, I didn't understand what sanity was. Back then, they talked about the crazy nut house and the car wrecks and all the stuff that a lot of you heard if you came in back then, you know. And I no longer saw any future with alcohol. And so one, step 2, and step 3 came almost automatically with me because I didn't overthink them. And for the next 2 years, I went to a meeting on a daily basis. I took the steps off the wall. I had an off-the-wall program. I had a therapist because I thought I had some emotional concerns. I wasn't doing bad. I got a promotion at the job. The job was looking pretty good. I had a little money in the bank. Parents back in the house on the property if I wanted to go visit them. Brother talking to me. All the things that come with physical sobriety. But something was missing. And at 2 years sober, I went to Cantanning, Pennsylvania to a fire hall where the original Joe and Charlie were going to do a presentation. And the first night, a snowstorm came in, and they were snowed out, and they had to stay in Pittsburgh where they flew in. And they had a church open with the local community had opened up for an AA meeting. I guess there was a local AA member that got it open. And I went in there, and people had big books on the table. They had leather-bound big books. And there's a conversation that went on for the next 2 hours while it snowed that I'd never heard for 2 years in AA. I don't think it was here. I don't think it's because I wasn't listening. I just think in my area, in Richmond, Virginia, most of Washington, D.C., where I went to meetings, Baltimore, where I went to meetings, Charlottesville, where I went to meetings, I don't think the conversation was there. I think predominantly the conversation was overrun by our friends in the treatment center. There was a lot of treatment center talk. There was a lot of drug talk. There was a real lack of singleness of purpose. I don't think anybody was trying to hurt AA. I just don't think they knew about it. There wasn't much big book discussion. It was more 12 and 12. There was a lot of 12 and 12, 24-hour day book, Tools for Fools. There's a lot of different books on those tables. There was Hazelton books on those tables. There's always big books on those tables, but the big book wasn't really the predominant book in my area. And I walked out of that church that night, and something had changed. The change had began, that there may be a different Alcoholics Anonymous than I was exposed to. And when Joe and Charlie came in the next day, they did all day Saturday night, all day Sunday, and they went into Sunday afternoon because they had missed Friday. And I walked out a different person. I didn't even know that existed. And in alcoholic fashion, I got rigid with it. And I went back and I beat up the community with the big book pretty hardly. Alienated a lot of people. Brought some people along. And then I brought Joe and Charlie to Richmond, and they did a presentation and changed the Richmond community. And all of a sudden, in my AA community, the big book existed. And all of a sudden, the recovery process was starting to be talked about in the meetings, and I watched it happen. And it was a miraculous thing to see that, to go from a don't drink and go to meetings pitch to a recovery program that was outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I watched that thing flourish all over our area. And then my sponsor told me that I needed to do service. He said, I want you to do a conference. And we started a conference on the oceanfront called Pockets of Enthusiasm after Clancy's talk in Omaha, Nebraska. And we brought in all the folks that were enthusiastic about Alcoholics Anonymous so we could bring in enthusiasm with our message, because I believe that's what's contagious. I don't think people always hear exactly what we say, but they can feel our enthusiasm and excitement about recovery. So we set up a convention of exciting speakers that were singleness of purpose and would talk about Alcoholics Anonymous. And we watched that flourish throughout Virginia and became the mainstay convention for a long time, until about 16 years later, I said, it's time to rotate. I've done it for 16 years. And unfortunately, just like in most of our areas, nobody wanted to pick up the slack. And they're still asking me today, will you bring it back? And every once in a while I go, yeah, I think I will, but, well, I have brought it back. It's online now. We do a lot of conferences. It's easier than plane tickets, airfares, contracts with hotels, and everything that's included in it, treasuries and all that. Some people do it really well. And, I think it's a fantastic thing to be included in conferences and be part of conferences. Something happens there. My first sponsor always said, you got to go to conferences, Al. You got to go to conferences. You'll get a different taste of Alcoholics Anonymous in those conferences. And that happened to me. So things are going pretty good. We got things rolling. We got a home group. We're based in recovery now. The area is really starting to come along, and we're seeing lots of changes in the groups. And it's really Bill Wilson said, this is an experience you must not miss. We know you don't want to miss it. But I'm here to share that life in Alcoholics Anonymous is not all rainbows, lollipops. And popsicles. There's rough patches. And Wilson declares that in his story when there's certain trials and low spots ahead. And when we're hardwired into Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to get through that because we're going to stay the course. People say that I got drunk because of that. That's the greatest lie. They get drunk because their alcoholic mind has returned, that they don't have an effective mental defense anymore against the first drink, because the effective mental defense has become them, not a spiritual solution. There's going to be some tough times, and there's going to be some black moods probably. I've certainly have been there. And so I'm married now. The two people that had put me on probation become my business partners. I asked them if they'll start a business with me, because you set a good example in my life. I set a good example in other people's life. The two men that were going to fire me and now are my business partners. I have a wife. I was $26,000 in debt when I came to you. I'm out of debt now. I learned how to get financially sober here. So I always say now that my ego bought a big piece of property in the country and built too big a house. And You know, that's what happens sometimes. And, you know, when you're younger, that's good things to do. When you're older, you don't want all that. You want to downsize, you know. Try to get my wife to live in a small RV, and it's a no-go. So I'm starting to get resentful. And my business partners, all of a sudden, we just start clashing. And I end up separated from my wife. And I start feeling unhappy. And I don't know, but things are going south. And I'm chasing dollars because I'm making pretty good money. But I'm chasing dollars right down the black hole. And Wilson reminds us on a number of occasions in the literature that we need to certainly be aware of and practice spiritual before material. And I'm not telling you that I did that every day. Sometimes certainly material won out. I also think it's a human imperfection. I think a lot of us can suffer from that from time to time. I really don't. There's no perfection here. And I'm not resentful one day. I'm not resentful 1 week. I'm not resentful 1 month. I'm resentful for a year, going into the next year, the next year, the next year. Frustrated with business decisions. I'm frustrated at home. I'm separated. Now I come back in. And I just don't know what happened. I got upset with my sponsor. We went in different directions. I would never fire a sponsor. I never did that, but I had to pick up other people to talk to. And I hit a black mood because I got burned out from the internal frustrations and resentment that I held in. And I got to tell you that I took a 4th step on it, or 10 step many times on it. I shared it with my sponsor. I kept my mouth shut as much as I could with my partners. I prayed. I was practicing AA. I went to a meeting every day. I never failed at that because I always enjoyed it. Like I said, it's not a chore to me. I was always in meetings. And I got very spiritually sick. And now looking back, I think I needed to. I think Wilson was correct that pain is the touchstone of all spiritual progress. I think that's what I needed. I didn't know it at the time, and I certainly would not want to suffer through that again. That was a long time. That was many years of unhappiness. But I like to say that one thing that never happened is I never contemplated taking a drink. I never thought really about taking a drink of alcohol. So when people say, well, I drank because I was unhappy, no, that doesn't work. I drank because I got a divorce. No, I don't think so. I drank because, no. You drank because the insanity of the first drink came back and you didn't have an effective mental defense. Because there's a good chance that you ended up around Alcoholics Anonymous rather than in Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's a big difference. Alcoholics Anonymous is designed by God to get through anything without taking a drink of alcohol. Okay? Bottom line, and I'll share why, because we're powerless over alcohol. It eliminates the choice. Other than by myself, I can't stay sober. I need you in my life, and I need God in my life, and I need these steps in my life, and I can get through anything without taking a drink of alcohol. Anything. And so I went in a very dark place, a very black mood, a very negative place. You can get there, you can justify dishonesty, you can do a lot of stuff in there. And I needed to do everything I did because it changed me. And it changed me so drastically that where I sit today in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have never sat without that, going through that time. And now I'm not wishing that on people. I don't know if everybody needs that, but there's some major changes that needed to happen in my life. And one, I had to let go of rigidity. I had to become more flexible. I needed to have more empathy for people. I needed to embrace life differently. I don't think that God brought that on me, tell you the truth. I believe in the big book. It said we made decisions based on self that put us in that position. I really believe that. I believe that I'm responsible for my chaos. I believe God's the solution. Okay? I'm not one that feels like God's picking on me or trying to teach me a lesson or see how much faith I have today. I'm just not one of those people. The God that you gave me here was user-friendly. And I've always had a friendly God. I've never had a punishing God since I joined you folks. Oh, I've punished myself. I've punished other people. I've done a lot of things in recovery. I've made a lot of mistakes. And I think anybody that stays here long term is going to make a lot of mistakes. The great thing here, we can clean it up in steps 10, 11, and 12. We can clean it up with our sponsor. You know, we can ask God for strength and for help. I'm not a big fan of doing the next right thing because I believe that's all about mental gymnastics. I need to pause when agitated or doubtful. It's a different equation. I need to pause when agitated, doubtful, and ask God for the right thought or action. I need to constantly remind myself I'm no longer running the show. Your will, not mine, be done. And that's the process which I need to apply to my personality. I would get lost in statements of like trying to do the next right thing. I need to call my sponsor sometimes. I need to go to a meeting. Now I don't get intuitive thoughts by myself. I get intuitive thoughts when I'm around you guys. I get intuitive thoughts when I pray and then get around you guys. I get intuitive thoughts when I talk to my sponsor. You know, I need all of this. You know, I don't get me without you, and my fifth step's incomplete without yours. You know, and right now I'm doing this fifth step with this person that I met online. And it's a long one. You know, I've always been a guy that, you know, when you do bring your fourth step, we're going to get it done in a reasonable period of time. This takes time because it's online. We can only meet once a week. And it's been one of the most valuable experiences I've had because as this person shares his fifth step, he's sharing all about me. He's sharing stuff that it gets me to think like, I don't get me without you. I need to hear your fifth step. That's the bottom line here. I need to get to your fifth step. My fifth step's incomplete. And this guy, week after week, he's bringing up all this stuff, and I'm sharing all this stuff to me. I'm like thanking him for his fifth step. And this is the beautiful process of this engagement of the one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. There's just a certain chemistry that exists among us. It doesn't, for me, it's just nowhere else. That doesn't mean that I don't value non-alcoholic friends. I do. But the chemistry's among us. So I came out of this dark spot right in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. The light came back on. And I had the voice of hopelessness in my mind for about 13 months saying, it's not going to get any better. This is the best it's ever been. Just be thankful for your past and suffer through it, buddy. That's the voice of hopelessness. Came out, light came back on. COVID hit, online started. I'm sitting there going, oh my God, here we go again. Negative thinkings. I went to a meeting and like a couple days later, it's still open at 7 a.m. And this guy was talking about going online. He didn't like it. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't like it either. I don't think that's AA. You know, this is terrible, you know. And then COVID shut down 98% of our meetings. Just almost overnight. And almost overnight, the alcoholic gets online. Boom. We're online. There's meeting. We had to work out the kinks with the Zoom bombers and the security and, you know, a lot of stuff that, you know, we had to work out some kinks. And one day I just said, Al, you got to bloom where you're planted. You got to bloom where you're planted. You got to make this online thing work. And when I changed my attitude, I fell in love with it. And all of a sudden, we're putting on conferences. We're putting on history. We're putting on this. My friend said, let's start AA Comes of Age on Wednesday night. Okay, we're going to start that. Let's do a Monday night speaker group on 3 legacies. Let's do this. Let's do that. People are coming together all around the world. Think tanks are happening. Let's get this thing going. Let's bring recovery into places they haven't. Let's talk about a singleness of purpose. I talked about a singleness of purpose in one group, and they ran me out. They tarred and feathered me. They ran me out. And I thought, well, you know what I learned in that lesson? That's not the group that needs to hear singleness of purpose. If you're going to talk about singleness of purpose from a historical point of view, make sure that's the group that wants to hear it. I learned a valuable lesson. They beat me up for about 45 minutes while they were chatting to me. And the one thing I did that you taught me, I had to act better than when I felt. So I didn't click out of the meeting. I stayed and took the abuse. And they were quite abusive, but like I said, sometimes you got to take a look at yourself and chalk it up as your mistake. What do I learn from it? Let's move forward. I learned a lot from it. I made the mistake. Next. So later on in life, at 49 years old, I had a kid. Didn't want a kid. Had one. Medical science said I couldn't have a kid. Had a kid. I attribute medical science for the kid. My kid's 14 and a half years old. And he's had problems growing up. He's had challenges, a lot of stuff. And you know what I found out was one of the best things to apply when you're dealing with people, whoever they are? Calm down. Calm down. And let go and let God. Let God come in here. You don't have to micromanage. You don't have to be the authority. You don't have to be what you think that a father should be. You need to act like an AA member in that relationship. And it was difficult. There were some challenges there, but I had to get to the other side. Well, one day my son said, "You have really changed." And he said, that really helps me to see that in you. And when I take a calm approach in my relationships, they go a lot better. When I don't have to run my mouth to straighten people out, they go a lot better. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the tools not to have necessarily healthy relationships, but to have lasting relationships. I've had relationships here for 35 years where I never had those before. I have new relationships in my life that we just click. I don't believe we ever stop growing here. And this is not a self-help program. This is a God help and help others program. This is not a program that I work on myself. This is a program that I allow God to come into my life and help me. Because the major changes that I need to make, I can't make by myself. I'm going to need help. And that's what I get. And I've not outgrown that. At 35 years plus sobriety, I haven't outgrown that. I'm still involved in growing along spiritual lines. And most importantly, willing to grow along spiritual lines. So what happened is that my business crashed and burned. My partners and I remained friends, believe it or not, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, about ready to kill them. My wife got drunk for 4.5 years after 21 years of sobriety, about ready to kill her. And we're married. We've been separated twice, divorced once, still married. And I find that very effective in helping out other people that have relationship difficulties. Everybody says, how can you help out anybody if you've had that many problems? You can help out more people with that because a lot of people struggle in their marriages. And sometimes that's just the way a marriage is. You know, you're with the same person for a long time. You know, it's not a perfect path for a lot of people. And every once in a while, there's somebody that hits the compatible 100% and everything's fantastic. Not for most of us. We have some struggles here and there. So I'm going to leave you with this. I see the time's winding down here. That I'm in the best shape of my sobriety that I have ever been. I am going to attribute that to the online participation. I still go to in-person meetings as well, and conferences as well. But this has been a great thing that has happened in my life. I just can't tell you how much it's enriched my life. And I'll close on this thought, that God, in his infinite wisdom, could have given this to our friends in the medical community, but he didn't. He could have given that message to those friends in the medical community, but he did. But he allowed them to give us major contributions. We all love Dr. Silkworth, and we all love the doctor's opinion. Major contributions. But Dr. Silkworth said without Bill Wilson and AA, that when they left Tom's Hospital, they all came back. He could have given this message to our friends in the psychiatric department, but he did not. But he allowed them to make us major contributions. I consider William James a psychiatrist, even though those degrees weren't there yet. He had a medical degree from Harvard, as well as he wrote The Principles of Psychology That Changed the Community. Carl Jung, who was influenced by William James, who told Roland in the story that we have about the spiritual experience, would be a solution to his hopelessness and his alcoholism. Major contribution. He could have given this message to our friends in the religious community, but he did not. But they've been with us for a long time, and major contributions from the Oxford group and from some other folks as well. He gave our message to a broke-down stock speculator named Bill Wilson that was a hopeless alcoholic, and to a washed-up proctologist named Dr. Bob, who was a hopeless alcoholic. Bill had been given the gift of the solution, and Dr. Bob had not had that gift yet, even though he had sat in the Oxford group for 2.5 years. He was not able to maintain physical sobriety. When Bill Wilson met him in the gatehouse in May of 1935, a couple miraculous events happened there. Number one, Smitty, his son, said later on something happened in that room that he hadn't heard from his father in a long time. And you got to remember that Dr. Bob claimed on the day that he went to the gatehouse and was going to give Bill Wilson 15 minutes, it was the worst day he'd ever felt in his life. What a perfect day to beat Bill Wilson. Pain is the touchstone of all spiritual progress. He went in that room with, and we all know that, anticipation, coming off a hangover, not feeling good, 15 minutes, this is in my way, it's inconvenience. I got it. I'm an alcoholic. I understand that mindset. Let's get it out of the way. Let's go. But it was a 6-hour conversation. Smitty said just one thing that he hadn't heard from his father in a long time. He heard laughter in the other room, one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. Dr. Bob goes in the room in despair, and he's laughing. When he came out at 11 o'clock that night, and he got in the car with Ann, she said, "What happened?" He said, "I found someone that talked my language." Later on, Dr. Bob would say that Bill Wilson gave him 2 things that he didn't find in the Oxford group. One was identification with the first step, obsession, physical allergy, hopelessness, progression, and fatal. He gave him the first step. And he said, the other thing that I didn't get, he gave me the idea of service. of one alcoholic trying to help another alcoholic. So God, in his infinite wisdom, gave the message to the alcoholic to give to the alcoholic. And that's where we say Alcoholics Anonymous was born. And it was born on the foundation of one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic. And Bill left us in the big book on the 11th chapter, A Vision for You, or a friend of mine likes to say, a vision for us. He passed us the torch in that chapter to be able to give this to another alcoholic and to create a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there we find relief from care, boredom, and worry in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't find that around Alcoholics Anonymous. So thank you today for allowing me to participate. Thank you for asking me, and I will go ahead